Hi, welcome back for another Tool Time Tuesday. I'm Melissa Muir. Today I'm going to talk about moving metal and how the type of hammer that you use is going to determine or influence the way your metal moves. You have two basic types of hammerheads that are typically used with moving metal and forging and things like that. So here I have three hammers that they have different faces. Two of them are fairly similar. They are both planishing hammers. Okay, one happens to be a little smaller than the other, but they both have flat rounded or flat faces. They're round and they're either flat or again they've got a slight curve to them. Another type of hammer that you can find is something that I call a cross peen hammer, and that's where we don't have a rounded peen here or a rounded hammer face, but it's narrow and flat. Okay, depending on the type of hammer you use is going to determine the way your metal moves, like I said before. And I'll just kind of illustrate this really quickly and then I'll show it to you and you can see how it works. When you're working with a cross peen hammer, you've got your hammer face, which is long and narrow. When you work with this type of a hammer, your metal is going to move in two directions. It's going to move in front of and behind your hammer face. Okay, just like so. When you use a rounded hammer or something that has a round face, it is going to move your metal in all directions. Okay, so if I want my metal to be longer, I'm going to use the cross peen hammer so that it moves my metal and it stretches it out. But if I want my metal to be wider, then I want to use one of these rounded hammer faces. Alright, so to kind of demonstrate this, right now I'm going to show you what happens when I use that cross peen hammer, and it's going to stretch that metal out. Right now my metal is approximately about 2.5 inches long. It's just shy of 2.5 inches. And when I use a cross peen hammer, and I'm going to go ahead and use, they've got a wider end and a narrow end. This one happens to be what's called a narrow raising hammer. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it on the block. Anytime your metal gets pinched in between two pieces of steel or heavier metal, it's going to stretch it and move it. So that would be two pieces of steel. I've got my steel block and I have my steel hammer head. And what I'm going to do is just lightly hammer this. Okay, and you could kind of see that the metal moved a little bit. We now have a little bit more of a texture. I know the light's not very good on this, but let's see if we can zoom you in here just a little bit to show you. Alright, so now we have a little bit of the hammer texture on there. You can kind of see that. And you can see again that the metal has moved in front of and behind. And to show that it really has moved a little bit, let's check our length here. And we are now almost exactly 2.5 inches. And you'll recall that I was just a little bit off from there. So if I wanted to keep going, I could come back in. Alright, two different things happening here. Notice that we now have kind of a curve happening on this, and that's good because I wanted to show you that as well. But also notice that my wire is no longer just straight. It does now have a curve also on the other direction, so it's kind of going up and down. And again, that's just because of the metal moving itself. So to show you that I did lengthen this at this point, we are now at 2 3/4 of an inch long on our piece of metal. Okay, now as far as the curve goes that's going this direction, what's happening is I did not hammer quite evenly, and when you do that, the metal is going to start to curve. So to kind of demonstrate this or illustrate it, I guess, and forgive my non-artistic skills here, but what happens is if I happen to hit, let's say, more on the top of a wire, what's going to happen is this wire is going to curve this way, because what's happening is you're stretching that part of your wire a little bit thinner, and that causes your wire to bend in that groove. If I want to straighten this wire out, I have to come back and hit on the inside of that curve, which will then pull my wire back to being straight. And because what it does is it stretches out the bottom portion of that wire to match the top portion. Okay, so now let's look at one of the rounded hammers. Let's say that I don't want to stretch my metal longer, but I actually want to make it go wider. For this type of a project, I would then use a rounded hammerhead. Now, the more round, or the more, I guess, more of a ball that your hammerhead is, the more you're going to spread your metal, or at least from that point. And it's something that you're just going to kind of have to play around with. But there are purposes for multiple hammerheads. You know, I have, like I said, I've got some that are like this embossing hammerhead. I've got ball peen hammers. I have the planishing hammers that have a slightly rounded face. And that's what I'm going to use on this one. So I have one face that's flat, and then one that's kind of curved and rounded. I'm actually going to use the curved and rounded face. And what I'm going to do, make sure I get this on here for you guys, I'm just going to come and straight down, and I'm going to basically forge this part of my wire, okay? Okay, so here you can see that it's gotten wider, and I have created more of a curve. And in addition, that curve isn't just curving up, but it's also curving out. And again, that is because I have hit more pressure here and thinned the metal out on this side, more so than I have on this side. If I want to straighten this wire out, I need to come back and hammer more here on this edge of it. Okay, I'll do that really quickly. And I'll just hammer this down to kind of flatten my wire out. You guys can see this a little better. Okay, so now you can see that we have like a little bit of a belly here, if you will. And then it's still a little bit straight here on this side on the top. So I could just come back in and forge that part a little bit more to get it more fleshed out. If I want it to be a little bit more dramatic, I can switch over to the embossing hammer on this one. Okay, and again here, let me straighten that out a little bit here so you guys can see this a little better. But see, and notice that I've gotten my metal much wider than I have longer. And just to show you, I'll measure this, and it has lengthened a little bit. So I'm at 2.5 inches. So it has lengthened a little bit because, again, I am stretching that metal in all directions. But in this case, because I'm going in all directions, I'm going to get that flatter and wider piece right there as well. Now again, let's say that I wanted to forge this and I notice that it's starting to kind of wave. Okay, so here you can kind of see we've got a little bit of a wave going. And the reason for that, and I'll get a pencil here so I can kind of point this out a little better. So down here, I've got a nice little, you know, kind of a bump going. And then over here, it kind of dips up a little bit. Okay, and then over here, we have this wave that comes out this way. So my metal is making more of a wave shape rather than just going straight out. And again, that's because I've put more pressure here on the top, and on this case I've got more pressure down here on the bottom. And again, to even this out and to straighten it out, I would need to come back and give some more pressure right here to thin this metal out so that it matches the thickness of the top up here. And by doing that, it will go ahead and even that out for me. So that way then it becomes more straight. So when you're forming or forging, if you get that curve, what's happening is you're thinning out the metal, and the metal's going to curve that direction to straighten it out, thin out the opposite edge by striking and spreading the metal on that opposite side. So hopefully this helps clear up a little bit about what's happening when your metal moves, and again, the different types of hammerheads. Obviously there are more than these that I've just showed you, but it should be a quick overview for you and hopefully help. Thanks, talk to you again soon.